Hi everyone, my name is Jacob. Today I'm going to run through a very simple property concept. It's one of my first videos, so I decided that I'm going to use this time to actually do a full concept in terms of buying property in Singapore. Instead of giving a product or throwing something out there to say it's good or not good, I'm going to show you how I as an agent basically use the entirety of this concept to run through how all my clients buy properties. So by using this concept, you'll be able to actually identify whether this product is a good product, and it can be for resale market, it can be for new launch market, it can be for anything lah. But effectively, what I'm trying to do is to streamline the purchasing power of buyers. And then I can showcase to you how Singapore market actually works. We don't exactly have to use MRT station, location, layout. We can actually use much more macro factors to determine whether in time to come, your property got chance to make any money or not. This is what we're going to run through today. I'm just going to talk simply about my 3 factors to the Singapore property market. It's going to be very simple, but at the same time, I think it's going to help a lot of buyers out there to really determine whether this is a safe buy. Of course, if you're unsure after watching my video, you can also ask me, drop me a WhatsApp message for me to help you answer and to identify whether this product is really suitable for you. This is going to be the start of our 3 factors to the Singapore property market. This is not a property pick, as I mentioned. It's going to be a concept of home ownership. I call it a FAB concept. Fabulous. In fact, I call it a concept to home ownership. And then I use this acronym F.A.B. So it's called FAB. Why? Of course, because I think if it's a fabulous product, definitely you can buy it, it holds value, can make money. Right? This is all fabulous. But if it doesn't fall under this F.A.B, right, then it will be considered as a flawed product, which means that you can still buy, maybe can retain value, but if you want it to appreciate, it might face some challenges. Usually when I start shopping with my clients for a particular project purchase, whether it's in the resale market or new launch market, I always ask them this question first. And this question is very important because once you ask this question, then you'll realize that, are you considering the property with the right interest in mind? So as part of this concept to home ownership, I always ask my clients to ask themselves this question. Assuming that you are not buying anything yet, and simply put, your kids come up to you and ask you a question. Maybe when they're old enough, they're going to buy a house for themselves, for their spouse. They're going to say, hey, Daddy, Mommy, I want to buy a house. But this house is a 30-year-old HDB. Just think about it. If you are a parent, what is your thought? Would you be thinking that, yes, they should buy a 30-year-old HDB? Or would you say, actually, kids, pause first, don't jump into it so quickly. Really reconsider whether you want to buy this 30-year-old HDB. And if most of you are going to answer no, like most of my homeowners out there or buyers out there, the question is actually very simple. It's because you will start to think, what if the house doesn't hold value? Because if you're going to own a new HDB, you bare minimum need to stay 5 years, right? So if it's going to stay for 5 years and it's 30 years old to start with, it's going to be 35. Maybe you have some life plans. You might end up staying there for 10 years instead. You'll be 40 years old. These are going to be considerations for you as a homeowner. So if your kids ask you this question, you're definitely going to say no because you want them to make sure that whatever they buy is going to retain its value. So today when I ask you this same question, I'm asking you not as an advisor, but I'm asking you mainly as a homeowner. If you are going to buy into any product, basically you're going to buy into a private property or anything along that kind of line, would you have to ask yourself this question? If the product is already 30 years old, is it considered a risky product for me? So yes, even though you may feel comfortable, the house may be bigger, etc., we want to make sure that when we buy the house, we actually fulfill this question. Whether if your kids want to buy or you yourself will allow them to buy or will be confident for them to enter. Why I start with this question is because I want us to understand that when it comes to owning property in Singapore, it's going to be a very simple process. We're going to have to simply ask ourselves whether it fits into my F, A, and B. So let's take a quick look at what this F.A.B is like. If you see my first thought here, when we talk about concept of home ownership, this framework is very simple. First of all, future buyers' affordability. What do I mean by that? If today I tell you that the property itself is worth 10 million, how many buyers in the market can afford 10 million? It's a very simple question, correct? If let's say your buyer is going to buy a 2-bedroom for 2.5 million, can you foresee that this property is going to be able to sell at 3 million in 10 years' time? Because if it's a 2-bedroom for 2.5 million, to sell it at 3 million may be very challenging. But if we change the idea around and say that, okay, this time I have a 3-bedroom condo and I'm buying it today for 1.6 million. Do you foresee it being able to sell at 2 million? And would it be difficult for the buyers in the future to be able to afford it? So part of this concept is very important because a lot of buyers will say, oh, I can afford it now and I'm sure they will make money, but actually can it really? And are there products in the market that eventually lose? They will run through that. We even have the next portion of my A, it will be availability of supply and demand. This is not simply just there's an oversupply or things like that. It's actually a two-pronged approach. One, you have to look towards your HDB market, whether there's going to be a strong supply of HDB market. Why? Because eventually when they sell, etc., it also affects you. Second is also going to look at the supply and demand of the private market. And the next thing is going to be our buyer behavior. Buyer behavior is one of the strongest factors to how Singapore property market move. What do I mean by that? If you have a much older population, let's say people who are generally in their late 60s to 70s in a particular area. For example, let's use Ang Mo Kio or Choa Chu Kang, or even we can use Toa Payoh. If Toa Payoh has a larger population of elderly, what would be the likelihood of them actually planning to upgrade into a bigger condominium, more expensive condominium, or in fact, be willing to spend the retirement savings on a property? The likelihood will be a bit lower. If we look at the buyer behavior, depending on the demographics, etc., we'll be able to identify actually what type of product in the market is considered safe or not. Now, I'm going to run through a thought process. If we look at the market, generally speaking, most of us homeowners out there will go towards HDB market, non-landed private residential, or we'll go towards landed private residential. But today, I'm not going to focus on all three. It'll be a very dry and very boring video. I'm just going to focus on one, which is my non-landed private residential. Non-landed private residential market is what most Singaporeans will aspire to upgrade into before they reach their landed property goal. But if you yourself today are a young buyer, a middle-aged buyer with kids, you naturally want to buy a property that effectively can hold its value, or preferably if it can make money. If most of us are going to fall into this range, then we will have to look at certain case studies within this range. So let's take a look. Before we start, I'm going to ask a simple question as well. So when most of us actually start buying property today, we become very emotional, and then we say that actually I want to buy a property today that fits me, or I want to buy a property today that I feel will make money. But if we look at it in this way, using the FAB concept, and we simply look at the type of demographic of our buyers, be it a young, dual income, no kids, dual income with kids, or even elderly family profiles, we just need to understand, if today whatever you own, you must be able to have future buyers that want to buy from you, want and are able to buy from you. Because if you are able to identify the type of product, then you will make very calculated choices. What do I mean by that? If let's say today you are dual income, no kids, DINKS, and then you say that today I buy a 1+ study, what is the likelihood of a dual income, no kids family profile, a elderly profile, or even a young family profile to want to buy your 1+ study? Naturally speaking, your demand pool drops a lot. So when we look for a property today, we want to try, within our means of course, to aim for a property that effectively in 2030 or even in 2035, the buyers in that market is able to buy from us. Because if you can choose to buy a property that fits into the 2030 to 2035 demographic behavior or market, this is when exiting becomes very clear-cut, because you will at least be able to exit to a larger demographic pool. Different demographics definitely will have its different impact, so this is where we really try to dive down into it. Let's do a very quick case study. Using my dual income, no kids as an anchor for now. If you ask yourself, your peers are within the 30 to 35-year-old range, that means now they're about this kind of age group, are they making an average of 7,000 to 8,000? Of course, you can say that, oh, maybe a lot of them are not. In fact, maybe you can even see that a lot of them are making more than that. But within my own age group, I've seen recently that actually a lot of my peers are earning between 7 to 8K, and this is quite standard per person. If you take a look at my profiles here, depending on the kind of industry you're in, of course, most people between 30 to 34, on average, based on SingStat, right, are earning about 8,008 if they're in a managerial role. They earn professional roles up to 7,006, depending on their industry. Of course, we have our slightly more clerical support workers earning about 3,005. Of course, we look at a different type of range, but if you are looking to buy a private property, usually I can safely say that you earn about this kind of range. A lot of my peers are slightly younger, even less than 30, some of them earning even more than 7,000 to 8,000. So I just use a very average kind of price range. And I say 7,000 to 8,000 per person for 30 to 35 years of age. When we look at the futures buyers' affordability, if today this is what they're earning, would they be earning more in 2030 to 2035? That's one question. If we take a look at future buyer affordability and we say that, never mind, even in 2030, they are only earning 7,000 to 8,000. That means I'm not going to overstate the income. I'm not going to say they earn 20,000, but simply we put it as a very logical number. At 30 years old, earn 7,500, 30 years old, earn 8,000, combined income, I'm looking at $15,500. Based on this and the maximum loan tenure of 30 years, you'll notice that their max loan will be about 1.78 million. In that sense, if they are able to buy, the max property purchase price will then be 2.38 million. So actually, whether can this buyer really afford it or not? So let's break it down a little bit. Effectively, the installment will become 5,900 based on this current prevailing interest rates. If let's say the interest rate is a bit higher, then of course the installment will go up a little bit more. But if we look at it this way, each buyer will have CPF payments. So when they are paid out their CPF, they'll get 1,700 and 1,800 respectively. Totaling out their CPF monthly payout will become 3,500. Based on the $5,976 monthly installment, the cash difference becomes 2,400. For profiles that are dual income, no kids, we then need to ask, this 2,400 becomes what? 2,400 over 15K, $500. It's roughly about 15%. So at 15%, that means this homeowner that has about 3,500 being supplemented by their CPF will then be paying 15% of their income into their property. Then we have to ask ourselves, is this something that's comfortable for dual income, no kids, that have a certain lifestyle that they want to upkeep? Most of the time, we'll say that it's possible. But if we change the profile, and then we say that, now we are not dual income, no kids. Maybe we are dual income with 2 kids. Of course, that will change itself. But if we look at this, a lot of buyers don't actually have the problem to pay this 2,400. A lot of the buyers actually have the problem to pay the difference, which is my down payment of 25% plus stamp duties. They'll realize that, actually coming out $600,000 here will be a little bit challenging. So how do most of these dual income, no kids eventually buy private property? And if my properties are in the market selling at 2.38 million, will buyers be able to afford? So when we see that the demographic in Singapore actually become more wealthy, or in fact they have more income, you'll realize that selling a property at 2.38 million becomes easier. So how do we do that? Let's break it down. On the assumption that you're buying a $2.38 million purchase, how much cash does the buyer really need to top up if they currently own a 4-room HDB? In this particular scenario, if this homeowner actually owns a 4-room HDB, then they got no kids yet, maybe they got 1 pet. A lot of people do income 1 pet. So what we're looking at is that if they sell the HDB at $690,000 here, and assuming they bought it as a BTO at $300,000, down pay $75K, sell later with an outstanding loan of $183,000, effectively, after everything, they will get a cash out of $492K. Eventually, they only need to top up $103,000 if they were to buy a $2.38 million property, because their first HDB usually helps them. If they own a 5-room and they sell at $780K, eventually they only need to top up $80,000 by the time they want to sell. When we look at it in this way, is it possible, or is it easy, in fact, for buyers to upgrade from whatever they own, especially if their first property was HDB, into buying a $2.38 million purchase? And of course, at 2.38, it is a high quantum. So what if we change that number, we simply reduce it to 2 million, or even we put it at 2.1 million? Of course, all this price point, all this cash top up also will change. So if your buyers, or if whatever you buy is in an area whereby people who are dual income, no kids, and have decent income wants to buy in this area, naturally it is easier for you to exit. So if you enter into an area that is like 1.9 million, 3-bedroom, then you want to exit at 2.38 million, you must also have to consider the factor that whether in this vicinity, people can afford or not. Of course, I want to help us understand this concept. So if I change the profile a little bit, dual income with kids. Dual income with kids, usually they don't want to spend so much. They immediately drop their budget from 2.38 to 2 million. Down payment required at this point becomes 500,000 only. Assuming every single thing is the same, you then realize that, actually, if I own a 4-room, I only need to top up $8,000 to buy a $2 million condo. Or in this situation, if they own a 5-room, they in fact don't even need to top up a single dollar at all, and they may still have a bit of a surplus of about 16,000. What this means as a whole is that if you buy what we call a sweet spot property, it means you enter into a project or enter into a condo that's a little bit more affordable. Naturally, is it easier for you to exit? Definitely, for sure. However, we also have to consider other factors. That means the age of the property. We have to consider in the surrounding whether are people too expensive or are we cheaper. But all these kind of factors we have to consider. But this is actually where you have to consult with me. Then we will have a better idea of what to work with. But if I tell you, just now I asked the same question, if your kids want to buy a 30-year-old product, will you be a yes or no to them? Same here, if you buy a 40-year-old condo or 30-year-old condo, but you have $0 top up, do you feel that it is a risky project to buy into? Naturally, there will be this thought process. If we talk about retirees as part of our future buyers affordability, that totally changes the game a little bit. Because why? They will generally prioritize cheaper, bigger, or even look at HDB because they don't want to spend any money at all. With this thought process, areas with many retirees usually present its own demographic challenges. So places like Toa Payoh, where their homeowners are a little bit older, or even if let's say we look at Choa Chu Kang, whereby the property itself is a little bit older. So that means most of the HDB there are in their 1980s. That means most of the homeowners there who are still staying there are reaching or already past retirement age. It is very unlikely that the condominiums there will command a very strong premium simply because the demand there is very little. And younger people who stay there may actually say that, oh, maybe I'll move to a younger estate in general. So that's why we look at retiree profiles. If your estate consists of a lot more retiree profiles, we also want to ensure that whatever you're buying into, even though it's a mature estate, it may be expensive, but can you exit next time? So as part of our F.A.B, this is our F portion, the future affordability of buyers. But then we want to move on into our available supply and demand. So same, every time I want to buy a project, I will ask my client the same question. In 2035, your kids want to buy a 30-year-old condo. Actually, at first I put HDB or 35-year-old HDB. Will it be a yes or no? Every product you go into it, you must ask yourself, if today you are buying the condo and it's already 20 years old, you stay 10 years, it becomes 30 years old. Okay, that means next time if the future buyer comes in and then they are young and then they ask their parents, hey, I want to buy this house but it's 30 years old, what will their parents say? Is it going to be a yes or no? If it's a no, you'll realize that as much as you stay in an older condo that is bigger in space or more affordable in terms of pricing, you'll realize that it's harder for you to exit next time. So when we look at available supply and demand, we have to look at two factors. Even though today we're talking about private property, I still want to speak about HDB property because this is usually where about 85% of Singaporeans stay, HDB property. So if 85% of your demand is going to come from HDB property, will its supply and demand matter? Definitely will. So we talk about two factors first, private property and HDB property. First one, supply factor of private properties aged 15 years and younger. That means by 2030 and 2035. That means not today. Because if today your property is 15 years old, by 2035 is what? It's going to be 25 years old. So will you be facing this type of risk? Naturally, yes. But if we look at it in 2030 and 2035, you must own a property that if you want to sell, it has its own unique advantages, such as being young. Of course, being affordable is always a plus point. But if it's young in 2030 and 2035, will you stand a better chance at selling it for a profit? Even though today you may have bought it to what you feel is expensive. So age of private property, number of units in a project, usually we always advise clients maybe try not to go for boutique projects unless you really like or unless you really want a piece of staying in a very small and enclosed environment. But otherwise, we always say that boutique projects try to avoid in this sense because we want to make sure the number of units in a project can help you retain its value. And of course, the next thing we want to look at is the price gap between a 15-year-old project and a 1-year-old project. If the price gap is more than $1 million, of course, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to pay $1 million for a 15-year-old difference in age? But if the price gap is less than 100,000 or even less than 300,000, actually this then becomes very strong opportunity for you because you are effectively buying a younger lease product with different attributes for about the same price as an older project in the same area. That's why some of the recent launches do very well because you realize that sometimes their pricing, right? Let's say in River Valley area, the pricing actually is very similar to the resale market. So if it's very similar and then it's a brand new lease project, do people prefer to buy that type of product? Naturally, the answer is always yes. So after we finish our private property, then we will later talk about our HDB property, supply and demand of HDB in the vicinity. Age of HDB in the vicinity is very similar to the demographics of our elderly profiles, as well as the prices of the HDB in the vicinity. What do I mean by that? As a nutshell, if your HDBs in Choa Chu Kang cost 600,000, can you foresee them jumping from 600,000 to 3 million? A bit challenging, correct? But if your HDB is already 1 million, but can you foresee them going from 1 million up to 3 million? Then of course, it is easier because they have a slightly different income pool, etc. All right, so we want to take a look at these two things. Let's start with our private property. I'll show you some case studies as well. North, South, East, West, we'll talk about all four, but very briefly. So we take a look at Treasure at Tampines. Why did people always say, agents always say Treasure at Tampines does very well? Actually, the answer is very straightforward. It's because if you look at Treasure at Tampines, within a 1 kilometer radius of Treasure at Tampines, based on TOP age, that means the age of the property, or even in fact, you want to look at tenure also possible. Treasure at Tampines itself was a 2018 product, TOP in 2024. Revell at Tampines is 2030, but that's an EC, right? Let's say we ignore Revell and we look at the subsequent projects. My Manhattan, Double Bay Residences, Tropical Spring, Modena, as well as East Point Green. You look at their ages, 2014, 2012, 2003, 2005, 1998. And if you compare in 2026, my condominium, Treasure at Tampines, for example, is 2 years old, based on TOPR, but everything else is 10 and beyond. Naturally speaking, buyers in the market, even though Treasure at Tampines is such a huge project, will say, hey, I might prefer a younger project because why? I want to protect myself a little bit. That's why eventually when Treasure at Tampines TOP, a lot of people make a lot of money from there. It's a strong factor to it is because of the surrounding neighbors. Out of 1 kilometer, I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 condos, excluding Revere, also 5. And then if you look at it, age of private property, younger than 10 years at the time that you TOP, I only got my Manhattan, which was 10 years exactly. All are decent sized projects. Number of units and projects all pretty decent. But at the point of time, you look at the price gap. Last time, my Manhattan as well as Treasure Tampines, the price gap was probably going to be a little bit larger. That's why people at the point of time felt a bit worried to buy. But now you'll see that because of the age of the project by itself, Treasure Tampines does very well. If we look at south side of Singapore, One Marina Garden, why a lot of agents feel that it's a very good product to buy today. So if we look at the supply and demand of the south side of Singapore, what we are going to consider is in this particular project, Marina Bay Residences. First of all, I want to compare a few things. If you look at Marina Bay Residences itself, when I asked the question just now, the TO question, Marina Bay Residences leased from 2005, TOP in 2010, which means in today, 2026, it's already 16 years old. And if you talk about its lease, then it's actually 21 years old. If you look at another similarly aged project, but a bit younger, for example, Marina One Residences, today is already 8 years old. And the lease itself actually started from 2011, it's actually 15 years old. So you look at its size, all are pretty decent size. All these projects are going to be of decent size. So generally speaking, all these buyers in the market will always appreciate this size. But if you want to consider in 10 years' time, how old would these projects be? That means in 10 years' time, it will be 31 years old. In 10 years' time, it will be 25 years old for these two of the younger ones, Marina Bay Residences as well as Marina One. Then the number of units are okay, right? But if you then start looking at the price gap, a lot of people will say that, hey, actually in this marina area, there's this condo called One Marina Gardens that is likely going to perform very well. So why do they say this? It's because if you look at part of my FAB concept, right, you will then understand that these properties in Marina Bay area, they are going to eventually be 31 years old, 25 years old. But then how about my brand new project in the area, like One Marina Garden? One Marina Garden, what's the price point it's going to have compared to my older project like Marina Bay Residences? So this is a small case study I can show to you. If you look at the supply and demand again, and I talked about in terms of age of property, One Marina Garden just launched recently. Let's say they finish in 2030 or 2029, doesn't matter. Let's say they finish in that point. By the time it hits 2035, this project itself will be 5 years old, maybe max 6 years old, something like that. And then if you look at Marina Bay Residences, it's already a up to 15-year-old project. And you look at the price, Marina Bay Residences 2026, a 3-bedroom transacted at 5.9 million, 3.85 million, 3.5 million, 3.9 million. Of course, the 5.3 million one is a bit bigger unit type, so we ignore that one. We look at the smaller ones, 1,006 square feet. You look at their price point, 3.9 million, 3.5 million, 3.8 million. If a 15-year-old project cost 3.5 million, and then you can look at the brand new project. In this particular case, our One Marina Garden, 3-bedroom, the range is 2.5 million to 3.7 million. The most expensive 3-bedroom you can buy there is 3.7 million. But this time, if you spend the same 3.7 million here, let's say you are the person that buy the most expensive unit here, and then somebody else here already transacted 3.85 million, doesn't that mean that your price gap between a 15-year-old project and a 1-year-old project is effectively zero? And if it's zero or in fact even negative, that means in fact your new is cheaper than your old, it's like going to the market and tell you, hey, how about you walk into a second carriage, buy a brand new Mercedes S-Class that is brand new, cheaper than a second-hand one. You will naturally feel that that's a good deal. But in this situation, if you are like an investor or even as an own stay-home owner, you want to buy in this area, right? Then you realize that, hey, my new prices are actually cheaper than my resale prices. That is when we start to see opportunity. So when it comes into private property, in terms of supply, you realize that the age of the property, you are going to be the youngest there, and you still have other plots of land next time that's coming out that can support the price. You have the equal number of units in the project, and then on top of that, you have a price gap that's effectively zero. This is naturally when we start to catch some opportunity. So if you look at all the different examples that we can see, actually if you can identify projects like that, that means that you will be able to identify a project that can effectively help you earn some money. So if you look at another project, this time in the north area, north being Upper Bukit Timah near Nara Residences, same situation. Nara Residences, in fact, there's a lot of condos around there. Huge supply. So people always say, hey, if there's so many supply there, will I be able to make money? That's when I always come back in and I take a look at these few things again. My age, number of units, as well as price gap. So in this situation, I won't go into too much detail, but generally speaking, look at my age again. TOP in 2029 is Nara. My youngest property is Dairy Farm and Botany. Then after that, Forest and below, they're all already 10 plus years old with their leases starting from 2011 and down. That means that effectively, they are going to be looking at much older project. Then you'll see that, but there are projects like freehold ones in here, Dairy Farm. There are projects that are 999 years. Aren't they also going to affect us? Yes, they also will. However, if you own a property, let's take a look at this 999 years Chestnut Residences. Okay, so this 999 years project is already 2009, which effectively means that it is going to be 17 years old. So if next time when you want to sell, let's say you stay for 10 years, it's going to be 27 years old, then the maintenance of the property, etc., will all be its own issue. So naturally, there are buyers in the market that will still rather prefer buying a younger product. So like for example, Nara Residences, this type of projects, they actually hold strong value in the future simply because by the time you want to sell, they are the youngest in a pool of projects. So buyers will always look at these few things. Like the first thing they go look at the project. Even yourself, if you, as a resale buyer, you go look at a 20-year-old project, you'll still really feel that this is a bit too old for you. So we want to look at certain products that in fact create this feeling that will make you feel that actually this product in 10 or 20 years time, 2030, 2035, I will recommend my kids to buy. That's usually how we start looking at property. So the next thing we can look at, if we look at supply and demand, look at Westside upcoming project. There's this thing called Lucent Grand. This project, a brand new one that's going to be launched very near Lakeside MRT station. So same, we look at our few factors. Talk about age once again, based on TOP, Lake Garden Residences, TOP 2026. Then the next one is 2020, 2018, 2014. So you realize that actually Lake Garden area or Lakeside area, the projects itself are all very old, 1990 something, all the way until 2015. So the youngest one, Lake Grande, is already 10 or 11 years old in terms of lease. So when Lucent Grand comes out, do you think they'll sell well? I personally feel it will sell very well. Simply because if you look at age of properties, the amount of demand in that area that's maybe a little bit pent up, you have buyers that want to buy a condo there for the longest time but don't want to buy old condos. So if they don't want to buy old condos, effectively everything below here may be something that they will cancel out. And then they'll go for the youngest project there. And if you can secure the youngest project there with a decent price gap, naturally it means that it's going to be easy for you to next time sell, being the youngest product there. After we finish our private side, then we'll simply look at our HDB property itself, demand factor. We don't need to look too many things, but if I'm going to use Lucent Grand as my previous example, then I'll share with you a little bit of data. This part will be dry. So if you want, put on YouTube, fast forward 1.5 times. What will happen is supply for HDB in the vicinity, age of HDB in the vicinity, and prices of HDB in the vicinity. These three things will be the impact to upgraders. So what I mean by that is whatever you own, especially Lucent Grand in Lakeside area, surrounding us is going to be a lot of HDB properties as well. Your demand is going to come from HDB properties. So you want to make sure that your supply, your age, and your prices all can support the price you're asking for. Same situation, same scenario, same example I'm going to use. I always like to use Toa Payoh. If Toa Payoh, all my HDB range between 300K because of its age to 500K. Because why? They're all 1970 something to 1990 something. Majority this age group. Then you have the few $1 million one, etc. Can these group of buyers, you're assuming 70% are slightly older properties, can these group of buyers eventually upgrade to a condo? A bit more challenging. But of course, if you got those 1.5 million HDB, all these people, when they sell the HDB, will they want to upgrade to $3 million condo there? Provided they're very cash rich or very asset rich, they may consider. Otherwise, they themselves may also feel that's expensive. Correct? So if you look at supply, age, and prices of the HDB in the vicinity, it will also determine whether you can exit your condominium in the future. Jurong West, which is where our Lakeside is going to be at, or even the most recent projects in Tengah that launched, or even, in fact, you look at any of the projects in these 6 clusters, Jurong West, Jurong East, Batok, Tengah, these 6 clusters will be very important for you if you stay in the West Side, because they will be your demand. Naturally, people will stay in the same area, upgrade, buy back in the same area, correct? If we look at Tengah itself, by 2035, we just need to understand a few things. By 2030 to 2035, how many projects, that means condominiums, are in the area? There will only be 4. What does that mean? That naturally means that my supply of HDB here, if they're going to buy back in the same area, they can only buy into 4 condominiums. Does that mean that if you own a condominium there, you definitely will make money? I think it's yes, correct? But if let's say I got 40 condos here, then naturally the whole thought process will change, right? Because all these buyers will then have 40 projects to choose from. But fact of the matter is that I only have 4. So if out of these 4, the buyers are either priced out or they don't want this area, etc., where will they go? They will go to the other few places that I mentioned previously. So if you look at total number of HDBs that is going to MOP itself, by 2030 is 15,000. Subsequently, between 2031 to 2033, 7,000. Then you will see that on the year 2030 itself is 3,000, 2031 is 700, 2032 is 6,000. Natural question, you ask yourself, when is a good time to sell? It would be when there's 6,000 potential HDB MOP, because this time frame is when most of your demand will likely come from. But of course, you want to sell early, you probably want to sell in 2030 because why? Your demand is still pretty decent. But if you say, okay, 2031 that I sell, would you be affected by a slower market? That's for sure, because your entire demand pool will drop by quite a significant amount. So this example was for Tengah Garden last time. Tengah Garden is 800 units. The number of ECs there is 1,007 units. Total, you got 2,600 units in terms of private properties versus the best part of 22,000 for HDBs. That's a 8.6:1 ratio. So naturally, every unit, there's up to 8 potential buyers. And of course, not everybody's selling at the same time. So we do a bit of math here and there. Lah. But generally speaking, if you look at Tengah as a whole, first of all, my demographics are pretty healthy. Why? Because they are mostly young professional people that have no kids or they have 1 or 2 kids because they are young family profile. So Tengah itself is going to be a very strong driving force. And these people usually earn a bit more today. Eventually, if they want to upgrade, they'll upgrade in the surrounding area. But if you look at another example, which in this situation I use is the Choa Chu Kang example over here. First of all, available private properties inclusive of EC that by 2035, the number of condos in the market between age of 11 to 35 years old, there's only 13. First of all, 13 private properties in Choa Chu Kang alone. But if you look at the number of HDBs going to MOP, it's only 11,000. So now you see it become the ratio 1.5:1. Total number of private units is 7,600, of which their age is already 11 to 37 years old. By 2035, condos younger than 10 is 0. So if we understand this as a simple consumer behavior, these people will have to only settle for condos that are very old, or they will move out of this area and buy a younger condominium elsewhere. If they really need to buy in the same area, then of course they usually will buy a younger property. So if you are a resale market buyer, then should you be aiming for a 37-year-old condo for your space? Or you want to protect your future asset in 2035, you aim for a younger condo. This is always going to be a very clear-cut thought process because Singaporeans all behave the same way. So eventually, if you look at it in 2030, whatever you buy today, 2026 you buy. After 4 years MOP, you say you want to sell in 2030. But you see, I have no HDB that's going to MOP in Choa Chu Kang in 2030. Will that present a risk for you? That's for sure. Hey, if you sell in 2031 or 2032, but I only got this amount of HDBs, will that still be a risk for you? Also for sure, correct? Naturally speaking, right, should you even buy Choa Chu Kang? So for me as an advisor, I will not advise because generally speaking, you look at what's available in the market and you understand the prices of these HDB. Will you be able to command a high price if you are selling? And then on top of that, what can you eventually buy to protect your asset? Maybe you want to move to Tengah instead. So if we then look at, I don't run through every single township. I look at a summary. West Side as a whole. People always say that West Side is the new CBD and all that. I also believe in it. Basically, we look at Jurong West. Jurong West itself, people will say, but Jurong West is a bit far away. I'd rather buy Jurong East because Jurong West and Jurong East got an entire different type of population, right? Jurong East is more central, a lot more amenities, etc. But in fact, do you realize that actually Jurong West is where the government itself is putting in a lot of effort? So how do you see that? As you see, in Jurong West alone, number of units for HDB MOP is 11,000. Then eventually by 2030, 6,000. 2031 to 2033, you see 4,000. The numbers is quite a lot. And on top of that, you'll realize that younger condos by 2035, younger than 10 years old will only be 2. And if I plus Lucerne Grand, it becomes 3. So that's now the last example I talked about in the private market of Lucerne Grand. So if I only have 3 condos that is going to be younger than 10 years old by 2035, then Lucerne Grand itself is closer to MRT station. Who will perform better? Naturally, the one near to MRT station will perform better. Then Lake Garden and Sora, maybe it will not exactly underperform, but compared to Lucerne Grand, it will probably perform a bit slower. So if you look at it in this way, the age of Jurong West properties have such a huge range, 7 years old to 54 years. 17 condos in the area, and the demand pool, 11,000 in totality, of which 2030, 2031, and 2032 all yield different number of potential upgraders. And all these are not including the existing private supply or the existing HDB supply. So all in all, that the ratio, even though the ratio is a bit lower, 1.3:1 compared to Choa Chu Kang, for example, but the ratio here will at least have 3 potential condos, Lake Garden, Sora, and Lucerne Grand. That can be in the market for these buyers here to potentially want to upgrade to. So if you look at it in this way, the west side actually presents a lot of pretty decent opportunity because Tengah itself, Jurong West, or even Choa Chu Kang, all these, the demographics changes, the age changes, and the type of products in the market there also change. So if I just do a very quick summary on this particular portion under my FAB framework, so you see 2030 to 2033, total I will have 69,000 HDBs that will MOP. That's really a lot. And then if you look at it in this way, condos in this entire 6 clusters that I've drawn out over here, younger than 10 years old by 2035, only have 12, of which 5 of them are ECs. And the total number of private properties younger than 10 years old there, non-ECs, only got 3,300 units. Not everyone is going to sell. And if you look at all the private properties, 5,900, the ratio is going to be 11.7:1. Generally speaking, if you buy in the west side area, you also have to choose the right product. So if you look at 2030, 3,000, 2031, 3,000, 2032, 16,000. Honestly speaking, as any advisor or even any logical person, when should you sell? If you can enter the market today and the price point is very low or the price gap is very low or very similar to the resale market, and you can enter anything even at 1.7 to 1.9 price range. Eventually, you're willing to hold until 2032, then you have a potential buyer pool of 16,000. This is going to be your entire exit strategy for buying in the west side. But then you have to know what type of product to buy. On top of that, you look at the number of HDBs that were MOP between 2030 to 2032 itself is 22,000. That's 1/3 of my 69,000. So naturally speaking, it is important if you are a Westie and you want to buy a private condo today, you have to buy the right product. Of course, this one you can ask me lah, and that's why I'm here, right? So you can ask me to help you identify which is the best unit type, layout, as well as the different projects in the market that can potentially yield this kind of benefit for you. So now that we understand the private side and the HDB side, we just need to know that the summary is very important. If your supply of HDB in the vicinity is strong, if your age of the HDB in the vicinity is young, and if the prices of the HDB in the vicinity is fair, that means what, 600 to 800K is fair. If it's 500K, 300K, of course, this type of range is not good for you. If all these factors exist, can places like Lentor be bought? Because generally speaking, Lentor, even though there's a lot of supply of private condominiums, do you know what's happening in the Tagore area next time? Do you know what's happening in the Chencharow area next time? These areas are all going to be areas that will eventually be your demand. So actually, if you can enter Lentor early, actually you can enter. Just how should we look at it? And then of course, for private property, aim for a few things: age, number of units, as well as price gap. So if you are able to collectively add these 6 factors together, will it present a very strong exit strategy for you? For sure can one. But this is where I really need you to then reach out to me to help look at the options you have, look at the finances that you have to really buy into the right product and to choose. Because certain 2-bedrooms also can buy, certain 2-bedrooms cannot. Certain 3-bedrooms can buy, certain 3-bedrooms cannot. So we have to choose very specifically when we're looking to buy an investment or even an own stay property that you want to hold value with. So part of my B framework, FAB, is simply buyer's behavior. This is usually where different demographics really have its different impact. But of course, you'll see that this kind of is holistic, which means that every single profile has its own impact in a particular area. So where will you see most lower income with families? You'll see it in Canberra, you'll see it in Punggol. That's why all these areas perform very well. Where you'll see most low income, no kids, you may see them in Balestier. In fact, Tengah is quite a lot nowadays. Certain parts of Punggol as well. So all these profiles are important. Then we see retirees, so like Seletar area. Then you realize that actually these retirees, a lot of them they may actually then provide some cash flow for their kids or for their grandkids to buy a slightly bigger, slightly more expensive, or even a slightly more premium product. Then we must also understand that if you fall in any of these range, what should you be looking for either yourself or for your future generation? So importantly, if I was to wrap up this portion, I just wanted to ask this question, which is, what do buyers want in 2030 and 2035? If you buy today based on what you want, based on your fear of whether it can perform or cannot perform, naturally, everything cannot buy on. So we always tell our buyers, if you want to look at why cannot buy, there's a million reasons. But we need to look at why can buy. And then we go down into very specific factors, like whatever I share with you using my FAB concept, to determine whether it is a can buy or cannot buy. So we can see the impact today if you're looking at the demographics, which is why big unit types command stronger premiums from buyers today, as well as buyers who bought before COVID, who usually would have bought a 1-bedroom or even a 2-bedroom. These type of buyers today are all looking to offload, right? And then eventually what would they buy? They will buy a 3-bedroom. If they are tight on their budget, they'll buy a 3-bedroom compact. If not, they usually buy for bigger 3-bedroom types because they would have made some money from their previous property. So how do you navigate this complex real estate market is very important. I think this is where I can really come in to give you a hand. But if you like this video, I'm also going to do more videos in terms of how can we analyze the market as well as different project types in the market that you can also use. So you just remember this concept itself, my FAB concept, future buyers affordability, available supply and demand, as well as your buyer's behavior. These 3 should be a very key factor to how the Singapore market performs. And if you have any questions on how the market performs and you like the video, do help me to like, share, and subscribe this video. Or even whenever you inquire about something, just watch this video to understand whether the project that you want is a fair game or not. And if you have any questions, feel free to scan my QR code, drop me a WhatsApp. If you have any questions, I can definitely answer them and then do a free consultation, no problem. So once again, thank you very much for watching my video. My name is Jacob. Anything, just drop me a text. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.